They were joined by Tahnee Perry, an experienced marketing strategist turned AI expert and the founder of A25, consultancy dedicated to rapidly transforming marketing and go-to-market teams through the strategic use of AI. Tahnee brings over 2 decades of experience in SaaS, tech, and media, and she also authors the insightful Zero to Unicorn newsletter. In our conversation today, Tahnee will share practical strategies for overcoming common friction points that teams face when adopting AI, reveal how businesses can maximize value from their existing AI tools, and explore real-world examples of workflow optimization powered by AI. Tahnee, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You've transitioned from traditional marketing strategist to an AI advisor and practitioner. What sparked this pivot, and how does your marketing background shape your approach to AI?
Yeah, so I have a long background in marketing and I was running a team. I lived in San Francisco and it was a travel startup and we had about 12 people in the team, and ChatGPT had come out the prior November and everybody was very excited about it. So I went to the team and I said, hey, can we work smarter with some of these new AI tools? And it was those early versions were terrible. Things were just, really clunky, not that useful. And most of my team really didn't want to work with AI, but I saw the potential for it and I saw how quickly it was advancing. And I felt like the resistance there was a sign of, the greater industry. And a lot of teams have the same issue. They want to work better and faster, but they find it really difficult to figure out how. So I saw an opportunity to help teams figure out how to implement AI. And so for me, it was just like this perfect moment to say, okay, I'm going to start an agency, A25. And now what I do is I help people train and implement for AI adoption.
Awesome. What types of people do you help? For people who aren't familiar with A25?
Yeah, so really any team who's open to learning and interested in figuring this out for themselves. I'd say most of the teams that I work with are small, so it could be SMBs, startups, all the way to mid-size companies. And then really the people that I work with it's not just marketing, it's anybody who collaborates with people. So it's really the entire go-to-market section of a company, but also human resources, because the human resource team are also, connecting and collaborating with people. So they're kind of a part of who I work with as well.
You've used the term pilot purgatory. What signs should leaders look for that indicate their teams are stuck in this AI pilot purgatory?
Yeah, so it can be a really common challenge, and especially because AI is changing so quickly, it's hard to keep up. And so your team might be saying, okay, let's do a pilot, let's test out some things, and then they kind of get stuck in this continuous mode of testing and testing and testing, and they don't actually make any progress. I think if you find yourself in that situation where everybody's always experimenting and not actually implementing anything, or they're scaling it, or you have the ability to implement it across your team, you need to go back a couple of steps and you need to say, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? And if you map out the goals and then you say, where can AI fit in with those goals, and be really methodical and consistent with that process, you're much more likely to get out of that vicious cycle where you never actually achieve anything.
You find that most often teams get into pilot purgatory because they don't have a strategy, or are there other reasons that these pilots don't scale into larger, more impactful solutions?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with strategy. I think is the main point, but it's all about setting your goals. Because if you don't have your goal and you don't know where you're going, well, any road will lead you there, as they say. So I think the first thing you have to sit down and do is figure out, where do you want to go, and the strategy is what informs that. And if you're still struggling with your goals and your strategy, a really good exercise is to say, what is our company trying to achieve? What are our higher corporate level goals? And then fit yourself within that architecture, if you will. And then once you have that strategic plan, it becomes a lot easier to say, okay, here's where AI fits and here's where it doesn't. Because AI is not this magic bullet that everybody really wants it to be. You need to be thoughtful about where you apply it and apply it effectively. Because, there are cases where it's just not a good fit, or you don't have either the right workflow or the data, or your customers don't want you to use AI in a certain area. So you need to, as a leader of a team or a company, you are the one deciding, where does it fit into this overall picture.
We're going to spend some time walking through an example of what a strategy and an implementation could look like. But I'd love to ask you some questions about what you've learned through your own experiences. One is around tools. If a team has already used and is using multiple tools, AI tools, but hasn't seen much in the way of results, what might they be overlooking?
Well, I think if you have tech stack bloat, which is becoming more and more common, I mean, I do presentations all the time and I have this slide with all the MarTech and the AI tools, and it's just like you can't even make out the individual logos. I think there's like 14,000 tools and platforms available today, so it is a lot. So if you are having MarTech stack bloat, then you're not alone. Don't feel like it's a special problem for you. I think the first thing you really need to do is a spring clean, and it's the right time of year for that. It's spring, so you should sit down with your team and map out every single tool that you have in your tech stack and figure out what's it for. Is it effective? And are people using it? Because if you don't have those three things, well, then you should get rid of it. And what I recommend teams do is look at their core systems. And usually that's your CRM, your customer relationship management tool. And that's probably Salesforce or HubSpot. And then you kind of circle all the other platforms around that and make sure that they can integrate and they can talk to each other. Because that's once you're integrated and everything's seamless, you're much more likely to get better outputs.
What common fears or misconceptions about AI do you frequently encounter with marketing and go-to-market teams?
I hear a lot people say it's not good at X, and it can vary. I hear a lot of copywriters really hate, especially ChatGPT, because, I understand their feelings. They're seeing a flood of all this copy out there on the web now that's being cut and paste out of ChatGPT, and it's really generic and it's not great. And they also feel like this is a threat to their livelihood, which, in some cases that's probably true. But if I hear someone say it's not good at X, to me, it's changing and improving so quickly, and it's good at so many other things. To me, it's just like a roadblock. I don't want to deal with this. I'm afraid of it, and I don't want to be in this space. So I'm going to go over here and pretend like nothing's happening. To me, that's like not the right way to think about this. What you really should be thinking is, okay, it might not be that good today, but what about tomorrow? What about 6 months from now? And also, what are the things that it's good at today that it could help me in my job day to day?
Let's talk about blockers. You've mentioned invisible blockers in AI adoption. What advice would you give to a leader who is facing resistance from their team about adopting AI?
It's a great question because I think every leader is going to experience this because your team is very diverse, and you're going to have some people who are like gung-ho, they really want to get into AI and use it and experiment, and that's great. But you will have team members who aren't that way. And anytime I hear, oh, it's not good for that or it doesn't work, really that is just secret code for I don't know how to use it and I don't want to look stupid. And so there's a lot of, I think, fear. So you need to break it into two different categories. There's the environmental blockers and the emotional blockers. The environmental blockers are really easy to fix. A really simple example, this happened with a client. We were doing a bunch of training and everyone got really excited and they didn't have the licenses for anyone to use the tools. It's pretty easy to fix. You just go out and you get more licenses. On the other side of the fence, the emotional blockers take a little bit more thought and nuance because now you're talking about the way people feel, the culture of your organization. Sometimes it's like their resistance to change. As a leader, you have to take a completely different approach to that and talk to people about why they feel afraid or why they feel uncertain and try to uncover the source of that emotion and then help them work through that. And dictating you have to use AI, you're never going to solve for the emotional blockers with an edict that is like, this has to happen. I think you have to be a lot more empathetic with people in that regard.
How do you solve for an emotional blocker that is related to people being worried about AI taking their job?
Yeah, and that's a really big concern at the moment because you hear all these news stories of companies who are maybe not letting people go, but they're freezing hiring and they're demanding that their company do more with less and they integrate AI into their day-to-day. So I think it's a really valid fear. As a human, I think the first thing you should do is sit down and think through all of the tasks that you do in the day and try to quantify how many of those things are repetitive or could AI replace? And then really look at what's on the plate, what's left that's really strategic or creative, requires taste or building relationships. And those are things that are unique to you and that I don't think AI will ever replace. And hopefully more than 50% of your day is made up of those very human-centric tasks. If it's not, if 90% of your job is repetitive, you really should think about recrafting your role. And what I recommend is people think about their jobs as outputs as opposed to activities. What I mean by that is you as a person, what are the success outcomes that a business receives when you do your job? Not how many PowerPoint decks do you create or how many emails you send or how many graphics you design. It's more about how much revenue are you driving? How many relationships are you helping the company build? Are you increasing the trust that the company has with its audience? And if you can define your job as outputs like that and success criteria, you're much more likely to be successful.
For marketing and go-to-market teams that are looking at AI for the first time, what's the best way to start? You mentioned taking a look at your day or a workflow and identifying which parts feel repetitive or not particularly interesting. But how do you approach that? Someone comes to you and they say, hey, we're looking to adopt AI. We don't really know where to start. How do you help them start?
First thing is doing an assessment within the company to understand where they are today, because every company is different and every person is different. And I think, 2 years ago, it was pretty easy to say, like, nobody knows anything and we're not implementing AI at all. I think we've moved past that point now. And I think the biggest challenge I see companies struggling with today is inconsistent usage and adoption. So do an assessment to figure out where you are. Do you have a lot of people who are completely new to AI and haven't been using it? Or do you have a more advanced team? Once you understand where you are, you can craft or you can build a program to move forward from there. And then the second step I'd say is make sure that you're taking a collaborative approach. If you're a larger company, you could pull in your VPs or your directors and sit down and figure out a plan together. And then also make sure that you're listening to the team as a whole for what they need. And they'll give you clues. They'll tell you exactly what they want or what they fear. And those are the things that you need to build into your plan.
I'd love to walk through an example of what that looks like and what comes next. You shared with me a case study from work you've done with a SaaS platform. Tell me a little bit about that engagement. What problem did they come to you with? And what was the first step you took?
Yeah, that was a mid-size marketing team, about 60 people in the SaaS space. They were pretty new. They didn't have a lot of expertise. I think when we polled the team, they were kind of I work with a partner and we always ask, where are you on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being have no idea about AI and 5 being an expert and guiding. And they were more in the 2 to 3 category. So not completely new, but it was pretty early stages for them. So we crafted an entire program. It ran for a full year. And we started with the executive team, the CMO, their VPs, and all of the directors. And we talked to them about what they were trying to achieve. So we outlined all the goals and then where they felt like they had the most friction and pain. And then we helped them plot out a plan for that. And then once we felt like the leadership were on board, aligned with the program, then we put it in place. And it had a couple of different elements. The first were a series of knowledge sharing workshops. And we felt like that was important because people just didn't have the knowledge. So that was like, okay, let's set a foundation so everybody's on the same playing field. And then after the knowledge share, we went into more hands-on workshops and something we called open office hours. And actually the most inspiring sessions were the open office hours because people would just bring their, I'm having trouble with this project or this workflow. Do you have some suggestions? And then we would do it live. We would get into a tool or we would use ChatGPT and then help them go through the steps to work faster, smarter, or improve their outputs. And you could just see all the light bulbs go off in their head oh my gosh, I've been struggling with this for so long and now I have this great solution. And when we got to the end of the program, the people there, we were asking them questions like, how are you building this? They were building AI agents by the end. So it was really impressive to see how they went through that entire process to get there.
That first step in working with the client to understand what they want to accomplish, what are examples of things that people want to accomplish? Are these AI related or are they marketing strategy and more company strategy related that have potential solutions from AI, but aren't specifically AI kind of goals? What are some of the examples of those kind of goals that people bring to you at that early stage?
It can be both, but I would say it's most effective when it's tied to the company goals. Because if you're just trying to build AI adoption or learning or skill just for the sake of it. There's not really a lot of point in that. What you're really trying to do is help your team upskill, up-level themselves so that they can drive more revenue, close more customers, increase your customer satisfaction scores. And so what we found the most helpful is understanding the high-level company goals and how AI feeds into that. And so I think what we did with our client was we had two sets. We had what are we trying to achieve as a marketing team? What are our KPIs for that? And then a secondary level, okay, what do we want to achieve when it comes to AI? We want to make sure that everybody is considered literate, that everybody has access to the tools, everybody feels comfortable, their KPIs are improving. And having both sets like that makes it really powerful.
You mentioned the office hours where people came to you with challenges and you helped them troubleshoot them. What then came out of that, I guess, step? First was this kind of department level knowledge sharing, then the hands-on workshops, then the office hours. People are increasingly familiar with how to use AI. AI use goes from kind of patchy to more consistent. You mentioned that people started building agents and perhaps GPTs and other, solutions to their problems. Where did the marketing organization go from that office hours stage?
I can give you a specific example because we worked with all the different teams. It was events, we had the international team, growth, the creative, and they all had very unique workflows that were it wasn't so the knowledge sharing were more general workflows and understanding, and then the office hours were very specific to a certain team. So to give you an example, one of the teams that we worked with was international, and they had to translate all of their content into 5 languages, and they were spending, I think it was like 20 grand a month on a team of translators, and the process would take them about 6 weeks because they would take the original content in English, then they would send it off to the translator would take 2 weeks, bring it back for review, they'd go back and forth a few times, and then finally, 6 weeks later, they could publish. We helped the team create a custom GPT and we tuned the custom instructions, we helped them load up a lot of knowledge docs, and it took us about 3 days of work of just refining, but they got to the point where they were so happy with the translation this custom GPT was doing. I think they dropped their translation fee to like a couple $1,000s a month because they still had someone in the loop to review, but they were using one translator instead of, 15. And so they were saving money and they were shortening the review cycle because they could get it down to about a week because they could do the translation in-house immediately, do one review cycle, and then it was ready for publishing. So that's an example of the open office hours. Changing that one workflow had such a big impact on their budget and the time they saved.
I love these examples. Are there any other examples you can share of problems that you were able to help them solve within, whether it's events or international or other parts of the marketing org?
Yeah, we did another project with their video production team, and they had a similar scenario as the translation team where it took, I don't remember exactly, I think it was like 4 or 5 weeks to approve a storyboard for a video that they were producing. Let's say, for example, they were launching a new product. It would take a really long time for each of the teams to meet, have a brainstorm and a kickoff. The video team would go away and then build out a storyboard. They'd come back together, they'd review the storyboard, make changes, go away again, do the edits. And so there were multiple meetings, multiple steps, and it took 5 weeks to just get to the storyboard. What we helped them do instead was use some tools they had in-house. They were using Canva for some of their content creation, and we showed them some of the text to image generation features inside Canva. They could storyboard live in the kickoff call. So they would have the department that wanted the video in there with them. They would ideate, and as they were ideating, they would create the storyboard right then and there. They didn't need to send it off to the artist to draw it out. And so they eliminated, I think it was 5 steps in this first meeting by using a really simple tool like text to image generation, and they saved themselves a lot of time just by doing that.
Yeah. I imagine that there were some blockers along the way. Tell me a little bit about what sort of blockers you ran into, and then how do you resolve them?
They had two blockers. The first was, we talked about the emotional struggle that some people go through. There was one department in particular that were very resistant to the project and to the change. And we had the very first knowledge share, and things kind of spiraled out of control where people were really negative, a lot of questions about, things that weren't really related to the project. And it just kind of we got sidetracked. And I don't think people found it as productive as they had hoped. So what we realized is that we needed to spend a little bit more time with the VP of that department and talk through, like, what are your goals? What are your concerns? And what do you think your people need specifically as part of this? And a lot of it was like, okay, can we address the fear and uncertainty as we go through this? And we took a step back, we redid the session, and that brought a lot of people on board, and then that smoothed out the rest of the journey for them. And then the second was really technical and simple. They didn't have any of the licenses for any of the tools. So this was back when, they had a policy that you couldn't use the free version of ChatGPT, which is fair because there's a lot less security and privacy, but then they didn't give anyone the enterprise version licenses. So we just helped them get through that and get people onboarded, and that was easy to fix.
You've mentioned a few different tools, GPTs, which are lightweight customization. You mentioned Canva, which is off-the-shelf software with AI features. Tell me a little bit about the types of tools you used and how companies should think about buying versus building, I guess, the decision between those two.
Yeah, I'd say as a leader, or if you're the person responsible for your MarTech stack, you start with your core systems. So look at the functionality you have inside Salesforce and HubSpot. If you're using a contact management platform or a digital management platform, your design software, because a lot of teams use Adobe versus something like Canva. And all of those platforms now have fairly robust AI functionality. So look at those tools, figure out what the AI functionality is that's in there, and then make a list of what you have for gaps. And that's when you go out and you look for something specific. So it might be a translation tool, it might be a video editing software like Descript, or there's 100 others of those now. And then you can plug those in and make sure that they integrate with your key platforms. So for me, it's all about using what you have on hand first, rather than running out and trying to get that shiny new object that might not actually work as well as you hope.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the before and after here? The before sounds like patchy use, again, long processes, multi-step processes, expenses related to translation. Tell me a little bit about before versus after, and at the end of your engagement, how they thought about the return on that.
Yeah, so before, the knowledge and skill were very uneven, like you said, patchy. I'd say towards the end, everybody's AI skill and knowledge and day-to-day usage was a lot more consistent. What we found in the beginning was people would say things like, oh, well, it just doesn't work, or it doesn't work for this, or I don't like it, and I prefer my manual process. At the end, people were saying things like, I use ChatGPT every day. I've built an AI agent in Microsoft Copilot that helps me do X. And to me, that change in language was a really key, because it just showed how people's mindset had really shifted. And then in terms of budget, they did an assessment over the 12 months and they saved almost $500,000 on a variety of different things. Either campaign costs, the translation, video production costs went down, content creation costs went down. So across the board, it really helped save them a lot. And then I think what was more interesting was the team satisfaction went up, because they really trained people intentionally and showed them the opportunity. All the team members were finding really creative ways to offload the stuff they didn't like to AI and focus on the things they did. So you had people who were working on more satisfaction, work that gave them more satisfaction. And to me, it's really hard to quantify that. Really loving your job now. And that's really valuable to any team or company.
If a leader's inspired by that case study and the conversation we've had and wants to start making progress now, what single action would you recommend they take this week?
Oh, they could hire me. That's what I do. I help teams get to that point. But, all jokes aside, there are things that you can do as a leader if you don't have the budget to hire someone to help you with this process. And I think it starts with, again, doing the assessment and working with the people that you have on your team already, because you might be surprised at how knowledgeable some of them already are and work on a plan together and figure out what is it that you need to do today, tomorrow, and 6 months from now, and plot all that out and be really intentional about it. Because the other thing I see companies struggling with is they're like, we're going to do an AI initiative, and they get all excited and they have one meeting and then there's no follow through and no action. And what they've shown is that to really make a difference in your work, day-to-day work, it has to be a consistent effort and you have to turn it into a habit. And so I'd say as a leader, the thing that you could do that has the biggest impact is make sure that it's a topic, a line item on your weekly meeting. And you ask the team, how are you using it? What's working? What's not working? Where did you succeed? Where did you fail? And just by having that conversation every week, people will start to think, my manager's going to ask me on the Monday all hands, like, what did I do last week with AI? And I need to have an answer. And just being consistent that way, you'll change people's mindset over time.
Speaking of hiring you, you mentioned earlier that A25 focuses on tech companies, SaaS, media companies, but who should reach out to you? What persona, what types of problems, what things do you best help people solve for those listening who are wondering if they are a good fit for what you do?
I'd say anybody who's curious about working smarter with AI should follow me on LinkedIn or read the newsletter, because a lot of what I talk about in there is very practical to pretty much everybody. But if you would like to work with me on a consulting basis, then anybody who leads a team of people. And I focus on teams where the team is connecting with an external audience of some kind. So marketing for your prospects or sales, right? That's a really good fit. And if you're like a product manager, you're connecting with your users, HR because you're connecting with employees. So anybody who leads teams who's trying to up-level the AI knowledge and usage at your organization.
Touched on the potential for AI to replace roles and automate away jobs. What's your honest take on the real impact AI will have on job security and workforce dynamics?
Yeah, this is really common phrase in the AI circles I'm involved in, and it was AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will. And I think we told ourselves that because it made us feel better. And I don't see that being the case anymore. I think there will be real cases of AI replacing jobs, especially when it's very repetitive. That said, the World Economic Forum comes out with its report every January, and this year's report showed that 92 million jobs will be displaced in the next 5 years, but 172 million will be created. And these are jobs we don't have titles or descriptions for yet. So what I recommend people do is start to develop a very resilience and flexibility around what you're doing and be open to doing new things, because given that there are going to be a whole slew of new jobs, we don't know what they are yet, you want to be ready to be able to jump into that. And the skills that you have today hopefully are transferable to that new future.
Awesome. What a good place to end. Tawny, I really appreciate you coming by. Just curious, sharing lessons learned, examples, recommendations, and I appreciate your perspectives on helping organizations create and maintain momentum. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great conversation. I always love to geek out about AI, and I'm really passionate about helping people figure out how to do it at their company. So it's always nice to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Amazing.